Good morning everybody. Today I'm not in the Lake District. We're into August and that's a very busy time in the lakes for tourism. And so I generally avoid the Lake District at this time of year. But that's not an option for me this year because I have a number of clients coming up who want to go into the lakes to do some photography, and I also have my Friday project, the documenting and photographing the far eastern fells. But the rest of the time I'm going to try and stay as far away from the Lake District as I possibly can. So today I've come to a place called Great Asby Scar, which whilst still in Cumbria is actually part of the Yorkshire Dales National Park. And I've never been to this specific bit before. I'm on a small hill called Knott, K-N-O-T-T. And so what I thought I'd do today is do a video about how I find compositions. Now the first thing that I do in order to find a composition is I make sure that I go to a location that has potential. And I find locations that have potential by spending quite a long time poring over the OS map. And that's why I've chosen Knott today. There is supposed to be a large amount of limestone around here. Now, according to the OS map on my phone, the limestone should be in that direction. But I don't need the OS map because the cloud has now lifted and I can see it's just over there. Now normally when I come to a location for the very first time, what I'm looking for is a path or a route that I can walk around and take in the area in the hope that I'll find a composition that way. But failing that, the other thing that I do is I look for a high point that gives me a good view of the surrounding area, and that's why I've come to this trig point here that was marked on the map. Trig points generally are at a high point and that allows you to survey the landscape, and that's what I can do from up here. And I can see the limestone that I'm interested in, and so now I'm going to head off in that direction. Now there's the area of limestone that I'm trying to get to, but unfortunately my path is blocked by this dry stone wall here. So the next thing I need to do is to find a way over that. Now I do have a horrible feeling that I'm going to have to walk quite a long way out of my way to find a way over this wall. Now one of the things that they don't mark on the OS maps, which I wish they bloody did, are stiles and gates, because if they had have done that, then I wouldn't have wasted my time walking all the way down this hill to find that there's still no way across this wall. Never mind. One of the skills we need as landscape photographers is to be adaptable, to adapt our plans to the current situation that we find ourselves in. And the situation that we find ourselves in is we cannot get to where I wanted to shoot. So we need to find something else. Now once I've found a location that has potential, the next thing I need to do is to find a subject, something that I can build a photograph around. And I may have found just the thing. Now I know what you're thinking. A lone tree surrounded by limestone is a classic, bordering on cliché. But I don't concern myself with such things. Clichés exist because they work. I think this tree will make a fantastic subject for a photograph. I really love its shape. But the thing that's concerning me the most is being able to frame it up in a way that creates a pleasing composition. And my biggest problem there is creating some separation between the tree and its surrounding area. So what I'm going to do now is spend a little bit of time exploring the different angles that I can use. And although I'm going to shoot the final shot using my 6D, my DSLR, in order to do that while I'm wandering around, I'm just going to use this, my little Canon M50 mirrorless camera. The first thing I consider when I'm looking at a composition, having identified my subject, is whether I want it in the foreground or in the background. Now with this tree, what I think I want to do is to put it in the background. So that means I'm looking for another element to put in my foreground to create depth to the image. And obviously what I'm going to try and do is use some of these rocks here. The next thing I like to consider in my composition is the direction of the light. Now it's very cloudy and overcast this morning, but when the light does pop out, it's coming from the right hand side. And that means I get side light, which is perfect if you're shooting a little bit later in the morning as I am today. But if you want to shoot around sunrise, as I was earlier in the week when I was up at Beacon Hill Monument, then you probably want to be shooting towards the direction that the sun is going to rise in, because that's where you're going to get the colour in the sky. It's now time to set up the camera, and here I have a couple of things I like to consider. The first is orientation. Now because this is a top to bottom composition with my foreground and my background in a line, then I'm going to go for portrait orientation. But I will, before I go, also have another look round specifically for a landscape shot. The next thing to consider is the height of your camera. Now here I've got two considerations. Firstly, I want to try and separate the tree from its surrounding area by silhouetting as much of it as I possibly can against the sky. So that means getting very, very low. The second thing I need to consider is the distance between my foreground and my background. And there's quite a lot of empty space in between this big square rock that I'm using as my foreground and the tree in the background. And getting that low closes that gap. So here I'm set up nice and low, and hopefully that creates a really nice relationship between that thing in the foreground and your subject in the background. The final thing that I like to do before pressing the shutter button is to just quickly scan my frame and look for any distractions that can be removed. Now I know that you can remove these in post-processing afterwards, but I personally prefer to try and get as much right in camera. And with that in mind, there's a couple of pieces of wood that have just got to go. Now when I'm working in landscape orientation, there are a couple of things that I do differently. The first thing that I do is I look for opportunities to push the subject away from the center of the frame. So I don't like landscape orientation shots where the subject is right in the center. And so in this case, what I've done is I pushed the tree off to the left-hand side. The second thing that I like to do is I tend to work with less dominant foregrounds when working in landscape orientation. And in this case, all I've done is I've moved slightly to the left-hand side, and I've just got these rocks here. And there is no real dominant feature within the foreground. A word of warning when you're using foreground is you want to make sure that any lines that appear in your foreground are leading you up to the subject. You don't want them leading you off in another direction, particularly not if that's leading you out of the frame. Fortunately, in this case, there aren't too many strong lines in my foreground, and what lines there are heading in roughly the right direction. So there you go. That's my approach to finding a composition. I try and find the location that has potential. I then try and find a subject that I can build a photograph around. I then decide whether I want my subject in the foreground or in the background. And then finally, I try and find a composition that positions my foreground and background elements in a pleasing way.